At West Island School, the model that we use for our counseling program is that the three of us, Ms. Ghosh, you can wave and say hello.
Hi. Hi, everybody. So I'm the higher education counselor for Han and Ming, and I will be guiding the students of Han and Ming throughout the university application process.
I'm responsible for 10 and Yen.
So that's, you have all our details up on the slides if you didn't hear that. And then I'm responsible for the Qing and the Song dynasties. But in terms of the idea that we have different areas of expertise or things like that, that would be a concern for you, we work really closely together as a team. So each of us knows things that the other people don't know. So for example, today I'm going to be presenting on the US content. You don't need to have your child be with me if you're interested in the US, because we work together. So any information that I have, I'm going to share that with the rest of the team, and everybody will benefit from all of our shared knowledge. We also have Ms. Kalyan, who you may have seen up at the top of the stairs. She's our office administrator, and she helps us book our events. When we have university visits, we typically have about 5 universities visiting a month. Today, I think we're having 4 universities from Canada that are visiting, so she helps facilitate that. And then she does a lot of our administrative work in terms of making appointments with parents and uploading documents as part of the university application process. All right, we're going to get into it. These are some important terms about the US application process, and I'm just going to go through them. It's a little bit boring, but this stuff is pretty important, and it can have an impact on the amount of money that you're paying. Also, a fair amount of confusion when you're looking at things like prices. So the first one is tuition. When you're talking about tuition, that is the price for what you're going to pay for the education itself. That can be confusing because the tuition that you'll see listed on the website is not necessarily what you are going to be paying, depending upon what school you're applying to. Other thing that's important to understand with tuition is that above and beyond tuition, you're going to have significant additional other expenses that you need to account for. So when it says tuition, that's just paying for your education, but you will also have to pay for your housing. You're also going to have to pay for your room and board, your food. You'll have to pay for insurance. You're going to have to pay for your books. Maybe if you're like a STEM student, you might have lab fees or other material fees. If you're art students, you might have material fees. You'll also have transportation. You as a family will also make decisions about to what extent your child will be traveling back and forth from the United States to other places or other states. So it would certainly be very easy to have your expenses be another 10 or 12,000 US dollars on top of the tuition based upon those additional expenses. The term that you want to look for is cost of attendance, and that's that idea of tuition plus all those other expenses that we were mentioning. Another term is net price. And so when we talk about net price, that's the published tuition plus those other expenses. And then we're going to subtract what is called financial aid and merit aid, and that's what you're actually going to end up paying. And so this is where things can get quite confusing when you're sort of Googling and you're saying, well, how much does tuition at Stanford cost? What's listed for what the tuition at Stanford, it's very unlikely that that's what you'd be paying, depending upon your circumstances. So when you subtract the financial aid that you might get and the merit aid that you might get, then that will give you your net price. Merit aid is the idea that a university is willing to give you money because you're exceptional at something. So that could be academic merit aid. If you're applying to that school and your grades are significantly better than the main cohort of students at that school, then that school might give you money to entice you to come to their school. All right? Other types of merit aid might relate to being an excellent musician that they want to have be part of the orchestra, or being an exceptional athlete. I want to have a caveat that getting athletic scholarships is very, very difficult, and it's probably more likely that your child will get into an Ivy League school than get an athletic scholarship. So it does exist, it's a real thing, but there's not a ton of kids. There's more kids who are going to Ivy Leagues in the US than there are kids going to the US on athletic scholarships. For financial aid is the idea that the university is going to be giving you money because they're looking at what their expenses are and they see that you cannot afford all of the fees. All right? And so you will get get money to attend that university based upon an evaluation of your financial circumstances. Something that might be a bit surprising and interesting to people is that merit aid is not something that is available at the elite institutions, right? So if you're applying to Harvard, there is no merit aid there. They don't give merit aid for anything. So at a school like Harvard or Stanford, 100% of the aid that they would give would be for financial aid. Whereas if you're looking at schools that are less selective at admissions, that tends to be where you're going to see more opportunities for merit, because everybody who gets into Harvard, everyone who applies to Harvard has exceptional grades, exceptional test scores, et cetera. And a school that's sort of more in the middle of the market might use merit aid as a way of enticing exceptional students to come to their school and increase maybe their ranking by having higher SAT scores, or just having a higher quality sort of academic community. For financial aid, one of the things that's also maybe a little bit surprising is that you would think that public schools are your best option. Those are going to be the most affordable because they're subsidized by the government. That is only true if you are a US citizen as a general rule. So if you're an international student, you will pay international rates at those public institutions, and they typically will give you no aid or very limited aid. Whereas if you're a US citizen, some of those public schools may be more affordable for you. So if you're international, you're going to find probably your most affordable options are actually private universities, not public universities. Moving down, FAFSA. FAFSA is something that's very important if you're a US citizen, and it's something that you're definitely going to want to fill out in almost all circumstances. This is something that you fill out. It's called the free application for student aid. And when you apply, there's no application fee to complete it out. You would want to do that early in the year that you're applying to university. So it opens typically in October. This year, that's not true because they've revised the system, but you would apply early in October, and the money sort of runs out. So the earlier you apply, the more money that you have access to. This would be how you'd get access to federal aid for your scholarships and assistance. And universities that are public schools will also use that document to make a judgment about how much financial aid you deserve. And in some cases, states will also give you money, but probably less so for us because you're not going to be accessing in-state fees. CSS Profile is a similar document. It's a document that's from the same people who publish AP and SAT. It's the College Board. That one is not free to do. And that one would be something that both international students and US students might be completing. That one would be one that we're using more with private universities. And so private universities will evaluate your assets and your liabilities and your income and all those sorts of things, and then based upon an evaluation of those things, then they'll make a determination about how much money they're going to award you in terms of financial assistance. Again, ideally you'd be completing that in October. So if your child is in year 12, that's something that's coming up pretty soon. It will be a huge pain in the neck. You have to get a lot of documents together. It's not something that you're going to be able to sit down and do in 15 minutes. You may need to prepare over a couple days or weeks to organize all of the financial documentation that you will need to submit everything. The last one is just that some schools, for whatever reason, they don't use either one of those systems, and they have their own thing. So when you apply to that university, they have their own platform that you will fill in, and they will have their own specific questions that they'll ask you. Okay. Something else that's really important to think about, this is for US citizens, is you will get your aid report. There's gift aid and there's loans. And it's very important that you understand the difference between those things. Gift aid is, there's no repayment that's required. So a gift aid would be something like a grant or a scholarship. So they will tell you that we're going to give you this grant or we're going to give you this scholarship, and it's free money. You don't have to pay it back. All right? On the same report, you will have different types of loans. And so you need to read that carefully because it will say that it's your aid package, but your aid is that you're having access to loans. Right? So you will have to pay those back. And that's something that's a very serious decision that you need to think about. Student loans are the only type of loan in the United States that I know of that's non-bankruptable. So if you get that loan, the only way that you get out of it is if you become permanently disabled or you die. So it's a very serious decision to take on, and if you're taking on a lot of debt, you're paying interest rates and things like that. But the idea with those loans is that you get better terms. So if you've got the federal loans, you'll pay a lower interest rate than you would in the general market. And the subsidized loans, you don't pay interest at the point of disbursement. You'll start paying interest once I think it's 6 months after you graduate. So if you are going to take out loans and you're a US citizen, the federal loans are definitely the best way to go, but it's still something to think about because you have to pay it back. Other things to think about is we've got in-state tuition. This is something, unfortunately, probably no one in this room will have. So there's in-state tuition and out-state tuition. The in-state tuition is that you live in that state, you've been paying taxes in that state, your money has been going to help run that university. So as a result of that, you don't pay as much money when you go to school there. Out-of-state is it's a higher amount of money, but there's a third rate, which is going to be many of us, which would be international fees, but that would be higher. Now, the interesting thing with this is, again, this is talking at public institutions, right? So if you're talking about University of Michigan, if you're talking about the University of California systems, this idea of in-state fees, out-of-state fees, international fees would be relevant to you if you're an international candidate. Whereas if you're looking at a private school students are not, they're not distinguished between international, local, out-of-state, etc. So everybody pays the same amount based upon their ability to pay at those types of institutions. So this is something that I definitely recommend that you become aware of. Not being political, it's something that's relatively new. It came out under the Obama administration as an effort to try to make things more transparent, because in our first couple slides we talked about some things I know were already a bit confusing. So what happens is all universities now are required to have something that's called a net price calculator. And the net price calculator allows you to figure essentially what you will pay. So you Google the name of the university and then the term net price calculator, and then it will ask you a series of questions. If it asks you a lot of questions, then their estimate on what you will pay will be pretty accurate. If it asks you only a couple questions, then it will be less accurate. But it's a good way to get a ballpark idea about whether this is a school that you're going to be able to afford or not. So it will be asking you questions about your citizenship. We'll be asking you questions about maybe how much money you have in savings, how much money you have invested, whether you own a home, whether maybe you own a mortgage, whether you have a mortgage, do you have other students in private school or university, maybe your annual salary. All those types of questions are questions that they're going to be looking at to determine how much you're going to be paying. So when you get that number, it's important that you understand that that's not a binding number. That's just sort of an estimate number for you to have a basic sense. You won't know what your actual amount that you will be required to pay until later when you get your financial aid offer. I'm going to show this, and it's in the slides. This is sort of a fake financial aid offer, and it's got some of the things that we've been talking about. Okay, so up at the top, you can see that it's got tuition, activity and tech fee, housing, meals, and then you've got your total cost there is $28,000, and that's got other estimated costs. So they're expecting that it will cost you $820 on books, that you're going to maybe be paying $1,700 on transportation, and then sort of $900 on miscellaneous things. So that brings the total estimated cost of attendance for 1 year at this school to $31,000. Then we get down here, and this is clear, but each individual university will have their own document. It's not standardized. So if you get a document and you can't read it, you can't understand it, you can bring it into your university counselor, and we'll help make sure that you're not confused about what's grant money or aid money or loans. So here's the different types of aid that this student would be getting. So there's federal monies, and then there's state monies, and then there's institutional monies. And then we come down here, and then there's different things. These are loans. The work study is not a loan, but the idea is that basically you get privileged access to a special type of job on the university campus, and that money then can go towards your living expenses and your education and things like that. And then below that, we've got the subsidized and the unsubsidized loans. So your letter will look something like this, but it won't look exactly like this. And sometimes they use different terms, and it's confusing, and it's not standardized. So like I said, if you get that and you can't make sense of it, feel free to bring it in to us. We'll be happy to support you with that. Okay. The next one, this is one of my favorite things. I'm super excited to share it with you. There's a group of people who went, they're called Big J Consulting, and they went through the common data set, and they made this incredible table. They've got some other great resources as well. So this is something you might want to look at later. It's about the impact of early decision on admissions. And then this is domestic aid rates. And this one I think is quite cool. This is financial aid for undergraduate international non-citizens. So this would be a very, very, very useful document for you to look at, because it will help you determine whether the schools you're looking at will offer you aid or not, and how much aid they will offer you. So this one is an interactive document. Right now, it is alphabetical order, and it can show you the percentage of international students. It'll show you the average award money to international student. So at this school, Adelphi University, the total cost of attendance out of state would be $66,000, but the international student will get typically a discount of $29,000 after scholarships and things like that. And you can see here that 40% of students will receive aid if they're an international applicant. So that's really useful. You'll see some others where 100% of international students will receive aid. And then there's some other schools that we'll look at, like, for example, Amherst College. Amherst College is a very elite liberal arts school, small school. They would have a big endowment, and they're a school that probably is going to do something called meet full need. And so you can see that even their tuition and cost of attendance is very high at $83,000 a year. The average international student actually gets $76,000 in scholarships. All right? So this is not like a secret strategy that I'm going to apply to Harvard or Stanford because I'm going to get a full scholarship if we've got limited means. It's very, very difficult to get in there. But if you are a really exceptional candidate, those schools that have those enormous endowments typically will meet full need. So at Stanford, if your family's income, joint income, is less than 150,000 US dollars a year, you don't pay any tuition. And other schools have similar schemes like that. But the bad news with that is that you have to get in. So anyways, you can manipulate this document so you can sort things from high to low and all of that, and it's definitely worth having a look at. Some other things to think about in terms of alternative pathways. One is that if you are a US citizen, you will not be eligible to have access to in-state tuition from West Island School. State by state, that will vary in terms of how you would access in-state tuition. And in some states, it's relatively easy to transition into being able to access in-state tuition. And in other states, it's very difficult. And so that's something that maybe is worth doing a little bit of research on. Your child could maybe do a gap year. Maybe they could do that gap year in that state. Maybe they could go part-time to a school or something like that while they're working part-time. And then after a period of maybe 2 or 3 years, they would have residency and they would pay local fees instead of out-of-state fees. And that would save you a lot of money potentially. Another idea that's definitely worth considering is a program that's called a 2+2 program. And that's where you would do 2 years at a community college, and then you would do your final 2 years at typically a public university. This is really popular, and they're really promoting it in California right now. It's something that US citizens can do, but it's something also that international students can do. And so when you graduate, there's no asterisks on your diploma. There's nothing weird about your diploma. If you were to graduate from a University of California system school, you just would say UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC Riverside on the diploma. This is a basic scenario below. For an international student coming from our school, you'd be likely to be paying about $73,000 a year as your cost of attendance at Berkeley. But if you went to a community college like Orange Coast College, then you would be down to about $37,000. Now this is in California, so you see your cost of living is a lot higher. You're paying a lot of money above the tuition of $11,000. If you were to be in another state that maybe had lower costs of living differences, you'd see that your cost of attendance would be lower. Probably the tuition would be relatively similar. Around $10,000 to $12,000 is pretty typical for a community college in many places. All right, I'm going to tell you some stuff about some finance stuff. I'm not a finance person. I'm not telling you how to sort of manage your finances. And depending upon your personal circumstances, some of this stuff is bad advice. You shouldn't do it. So I'm not giving you advice, sharing information, and then you should go talk to your tax advisor or your investment professional to make sure whether this is suitable for you or not. The first one is that there is an investment scheme in the US that's through the government. It's called the 529 plan. If this is only for US citizens, and the 529 plan works basically the same way as a Roth IRA does. So you put post-tax money into a special type of account that you typically would invest in mutual funds, and you've already paid all of your taxes. So you're not paying taxes on your dividends, you're not paying taxes if they're selling funds within the mutual fund, you're done with taxes. When you sell your fund, when you want to access the monies to use them for university, you don't pay capital gains taxes. So if you have a young child, I'm not going to say what young is, depending upon your time horizon, you may want to use this as an investment strategy to make university more affordable for you, because a lot of the monies that you would be using would be your returns on investment as opposed to what you've invested. You can use this for tuition, you can use it for fees, room and board, related costs. You can also use these monies for other countries. So if you have a 529, or also FAFSA for that matter, you can use those monies outside of the United States. So if you wanted to use your FAFSA money in the Netherlands, you could do that. If you wanted to use your 529 money in the UK, you could do that as well. Some other things that are exciting is that if for whatever reason your kid gets a lot of scholarships and they don't need the money that you've saved, you don't have to take the money out and pay penalties, which is what you would happen if you do take the money out. You can roll it over to another family member. You can roll it over to have them pay for their graduate education, or just as of a couple months ago, you can roll it into a Roth IRA, which is a very nice thing. Some other things, we've got payment plans. So maybe you've got a good salary, but you've got some liquidity issues, some cash flow issues potentially. A lot of the universities, they won't make you pay for the semester all at one time. They might allow you to make payments over like 3 increments. So that's helpful to some families. This is a strategy that probably is not going to be helpful to many families, but if you do have a lot of capital, some of the universities will give you a deal if you pay for like a whole year at once or multiple years at once. The 2 things that we see typically with that would be a discount, or you can lock in your fees. So the fees, you should expect them to go up every year. The price that you pay for your first year will not be the price that you pay for your second, third, or fourth year. But if you have a lot of capital, you might be able to pay more than 1 year at a time and lock in those fees. And so the tuition that you pay for all 4 years would be what you could pay for the first year. So if you're in that position, that might be worth looking at. All right, this one is definitely a big buyer beware. I'm not promoting this, I'm not encouraging it. It literally is the one with all of the fine print on it. Some of you may want to consider taking out a private loan. And so in some of your cases, you can do that through local institutions in your own home country or something like that. I recently became aware of this company called Empower, and everybody, I mean, if you're a US citizen, you definitely don't want to do this because you have better options for access to loans. Their rates are 13.9% to 17%, which by US standards is very high. But in certain markets, there's a lot of inflation and things like that. So they said that basically a lot of times their clients are from places where that's actually better than the interest rate that they would have been getting locally. So you need to do your homework on that. Please don't just do this willy-nilly. As you look below, you'll see that if you had a $50,000 principal and you took the full 10 years to pay it, it would cost you $170,000 to use $50,000 of money. So maybe you don't want to do that, but it is an option for some people. The way it works for them is they use an algorithm basically based upon the future earnings of the person. So if you're doing a STEM career and you're going to make a lot of money, then they would be more open to giving you more money at a lower interest rate. If you were doing another career where they didn't expect you to make as much money, they would give you potentially a higher interest rate, and they would also not be willing to loan you as much money. You have to use one of their partner schools, so they have a list of about 400 schools. And the other thing that's a little bit tricky with it is they will not let you do it for the first 2 years of schools. So it would only be if you were doing a master's degree, or it'd be for year 3 and 4 of university. Really, I think this is suitable for a very limited number of people. You'd be probably talking about somebody who'd be earning a lot of money right out of college, and you would not pay it out over 10 years. You would really sort of live on beans and rice and try to pay off the whole thing in a year or two, so that you're not paying so much in interest. Some other things that are possible benefits for some people would be that you don't pay interest at the point of disbursement. They will only charge you interest after 6 months from graduation. And then when the money is dispersed, it's dispersed in US dollars directly to the university. So that can save some people money in terms of you don't have to pay fees for having the money go between countries and going between currencies. And the other thing that some people see as beneficial is that in this case with this company, no cosign is required, and they don't require any collateral. So buyer beware. It's probably not the best idea for you, but there might be a handful of people that this is useful for. All right, this is my last slide before we go to Q&A. What is the most important thing that you should choose? This is audience participation. How do you have the most control over lowering your costs? It would be what? School choice. Thank you very much. Yes. So all of the money that you're going to save on your university is by choosing what school you go to. Because you can look at the information that we've given you and look at the schools that are most likely to give you a scholarship. Conversely, there's other schools that we can say to you, you will not get a scholarship from them. You will pay a lot of money. Okay? They don't give scholarships to international students. Additional strategies, though, would be looking for university-based scholarships. So, like, each individual university will have its own scholarships, right? And those scholarships tend to be for specific things, maybe people from a specific background, maybe people representing specific values or things like that. And so that is one way to get some additional monies. And then there's also third-party scholarships. So there's just scholarships that you can find on the internet. Obviously, here in Hong Kong, we have a lot of scholarships. Many of the Hong Kong scholarships need to be utilized in Hong Kong, so you need to do some research on some of that. Typically, what you see is the harder it is to get the scholarship, the less money that's available, obviously, and the easier it is to get a scholarship, then the less money that's available. Something that some of you may want to inquire to would be if you work for a major multinational corporation or a big company. Sometimes companies do have their own scholarship schemes. So I've heard Coca-Cola has one. I think FedEx has one. So you may be eligible for some scholarship opportunities through your employer if you work for a company like that. One thing to be aware of is that sometimes if you get external scholarships, they will deduct that money from your aid offer. So the aid that the university was going to give you will get reduced by the amount that you've received from the external scholarship. So something to be aware with that. Okay, how did I do? Not great. I got about maybe 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to do Q&A during this time, and the purpose of this Q&A is going to be really on sort of the topic of today's session, which is looking at ways to make US universities sort of more affordable. After that, we'll do a brief intermission because I know some of you need to hustle off to work. And then after that brief intermission, then we'll take general questions. So if you want to ask a question about UCAS or if you want to ask a question about Hong Kong or whatever, then we'll do that sort of in the last 10 minutes or so. All right? So any questions about sort of the costs and the strategies for lowering costs for US universities? Ms. Chung and Ms. Ghosh will help with microphones.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. So one question is, you mentioned there's an income threshold to receive the need base. For example, in the case of Stanford, it's 150,000 that you mentioned. What about any threshold on the wealth? Do they check the savings and?
Yeah, so if you make more than 150,000 for Stanford, for example, then it's not that you would have to pay full fees. It's for that threshold, it would be you don't pay anything, right? So it's going to depend on the specific institution that you're applying for. Generally speaking, the most important thing that they look at is looking at your annual salary, right? But there are some other things that they look at, and if you're a US citizen, for example, if your money is in real estate or if your money is in retirement funds, then those monies are sheltered and they're considered, I think they're not considered at all maybe for FAFSA, and they're maybe considered a little bit less with a CSS profile. So for international people, it can be actually quite hard because it's sometimes more difficult for us to have access to those places to have our money. Yeah. So the formulas are a little bit different, but generally speaking, the most important one would be your salary. Yeah.
Quick question on 2+2 for the UC schools, right? Do you do that? Do you decide on that when you apply to UC schools, or do you actually attend the community colleges first, and then after 2 years you apply to UC school?
Yeah, so it's not like a foundation year program or something where like it's directly affiliated with a specific university and there's like a direct pathway. Instead, this is an initiative in California. California is not the only place that's doing this. You can do it in other places as well, but in California, it's a specific strategy that the state government is utilizing. So they literally are reserving a specific number of seats for students to enter into the state public universities via community colleges. So hypothetically, one can go from community college into UC Berkeley or UCLA, the two most selective schools in California, and students do that. But obviously, those would be the two most competitive places in terms of that pathway.
So basically, you're saying you actually have to take the risk of going to community college for 2 years first and then apply to UC school.
I'm not sure I'd use the word risk. I mean, if you're saying this is a guaranteed way for me to go to Berkeley, I would say that is not true. It's not a guaranteed way for you to go to Berkeley. But in terms of when we look at the UC system, we were looking at that yesterday, and one of the schools has got an 87% admissions rate. That's a UC system school. And then for something like UC Berkeley or UCLA, some of their stuff is more like 7%, and then even lower if you're doing something like computer science. So no, it's not a guaranteed pathway to a specific institution, but you would definitely be able to go to a public university in California as long as your academic performance was competent.
Okay, so it's not like where I apply to the UC system and then when they give me the offer, they'll say, hey, you can apply, you can study at your community colleges first for 2 years.
No, so yeah, it's not like a foundation year program. In the UK and some other contexts, it's sort of like go and do this here for 2 years, and then as long as everything's okay, you come to us. It's not like that. So they're unaffiliated with each other. But like I said, the state schools in California have a specific percentage of seats that are earmarked for community college students.
Thank you.
Thank you for today's session. It's very helpful. I have a question on merit aid. Can you quantify, based on your experience and data that you possibly gather from West Island or your previous experience, can you quantify what sort of profile those students have to get the merit aid or be awarded with that merit aid? What is the IB predictive score, and as well as what sort of extracurriculum activities that they have been involved in? What sort of like profile you have seen? Thank you.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I think it's going to be, like a lot of answers, it's going to be sort of, it depends. The more selective the school is, the less likely it is that you will receive merit aid, and the less likely that you will receive significant merit aid. There's a range of different schemes. In some cases, some schools will literally say, if you have an SAT score above X, we'll give you this, specific type of scholarship, and it may even be something like a full ride scholarship. But to your point, there's other factors that interrelate as well, in terms of your merit may be interacting also with your financial need, right? So the person who's going to get the most aid is the person who has a complicated backstory, who's got significant financial aid, and who's brilliant. If you're, like, I helped a young woman who was a refugee, and she got 100% plus. She had an IB diploma, and her scholarship covered full tuition, and it covered room and board, and it covered annual flights, and it covered clothing and everything, right? But she had good IB grades, and she was recognized by the United Nations as a refugee. So your child is probably not going to have access to that. I don't think you need to have that. I would say that probably once you were getting above 38, that you could start to have access to a lot of monies. But again, we'd probably be talking about applying to schools that you maybe have never heard of before, when we're talking about merit aid, right? If you have more modest financial means, and you're applying to, like a young woman that I worked with previously, she was at scholarship at my old school, and her father was in the military, and he made okay money, but not a lot of money. She got into Amherst, and she got a huge scholarship from Amherst. I think that they were going to cover 85% of her expenses, but that was as a result of financial aid, not merit, because Amherst is going to be a place where everyone has amazing grades. Yeah.
Hi. For citizens, are there any requirements for students to be moved back to the country before starting school in order to be qualified as a local, to pay for local fees?
That is a hypothetical strategy that you could use, yes. So it's going to be different on a state-by-state basis, so I'm not going to give a specific answer, but if you were concerned about that, then hypothetically you could have your child move and live with an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or something like that. You'd have to live there for several years. It's not like you could move in senior year and do it, I don't think. But hypothetically, yes, you could do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. So if my kids are citizens, but parents are not, then they can still apply for FAFSA or federal loan?
Yes. FAFSA will be based upon the citizenship of the child. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, is this valid also for master's level, all of what you presented?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I'm not sure. I think there are aid packages, but there are other strategies. And also when you talk about like PhD and you talk about other things like that, there are different strategies. So I think, I'm not sure if I don't know how aid works for a master's degree. I'm just going to say I don't know. Sorry. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Just want to check for the financial aid part. Is it the same sort of criteria for international students versus local students? Would that this one thing I don't understand is why would the U.S. school also offer financial aid to international students when they're not the citizens, right?
Yeah, so generally speaking, and you should go through that document that I shared, you will see that your best opportunities are for private schools. And so the reason why they would do that with international students is because they have a mission to educate, and they have a mission to make the world a better place, and they also want to curate the best possible class. They want to have the brightest people they can have. They want to have diverse perspectives. They want to have people who've read different books, people who have different religions, people who come from different backgrounds. Because the idea is that if everybody's from the same city and everyone's from the exact same socioeconomic status, then that conversation is going to be a relatively limited conversation in terms of opinions. They will intentionally do things to have that, even also for sort of bragging with their boards and things like that. They will, if you are in the United States and you are from specific states, it's easier for you to get into certain schools because they want to have students. So if you were going to Harvard and you were trying to apply from New Jersey, or you were trying to apply from Florida or California, it would be more difficult for you to get in than if you're applying from Arkansas, right? If you've got a passport from Nepal, or you've got a passport from Kazakhstan, or you've got a passport from somewhere unusual, that's slightly advantageous because they want to have more diversity, and for them to be able to say, ooh, we have students from 180 different countries on our campus. And unfortunately for most of the people in the room, your passport is not a huge asset for your application because we tend to come from big countries with very strong university applications coming from those countries. All right, I'm mindful of time. I'm very happy to talk to people. We're going to take sort of like a 5-minute break. I know some people need to leave, and then we will come back and we'll do a little bit more Q&A, and we'll try to break up at 9 o'clock. I'm going to put up a QR code with a little link. If you can give us some feedback, if you want to do that now, that's great. Otherwise, if you want to do it from home later, we'll share the slides and you could do that. But basically, we're asking for things that you thought were useful about the event, things that you think we could improve. We're asking for additional topics that you'd like to cover. These types of events are going to basically be in this format, which is going to be sort of like a presentation with a Q&A, but we're also looking to do other events that might be workshops or sort of more interactive types of sessions. So if people can give us feedback, that's great. And if you need to leave, please feel free to leave. It's not rude or anything. In the future, if you need to leave, you don't need to wait until 8:40. Just get up and go. We know people are busy. So we'll take a quick break, and then if people want general Q&A, we'll do that then. So when we do these events, after sort of the brief admission, then we will go to general questions. So if you want to stay on the theme of affordability in the US, that's fine. If you want to talk about other issues of the US, that's fine. If you want to talk about Hong Kong, UK, then you have access to all of us. We were having a discussion up at the front if people were interested. We were just sort of talking about kind of the idea of having access to merit aid, and we were talking about some schools. And so you can look at the document that we were talking about previously, but another quick way to think about that would be basically looking at their admissions rate. So we were talking about USC, we were talking about Vanderbilt, we were talking about NYU. These are all schools that are below 10% in terms of their acceptance rate, and they're not doing merit aid. They'd only be doing financial aid. So the schools that you could get merit aid at typically, it's not that they're bad schools, but it would be schools that would be receiving a lower volume of applications. So they can be very good schools, but just, it's sort of like supply and demand. And so there was that conversation also that potentially maybe, you know, sort of the Northeast and sort of like California, which are some places that are maybe seen more desirable to our populations, those might be harder places to have access to some of those things. Whereas maybe being in some states that are a little bit less on the map for our populations, you would be a little bit more unique and you might have a better chance if you're applying for a school in like Oklahoma or something like that. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Despite the fact that if you have a U.S. citizen or not, especially for international students, is that true? What sort of information or intelligence do you have gathered on that?
Sure. So the question is about, there's a rumor that universities have like a quota for specific countries, or quotas in terms of how they're sort of accepting people. I think a really important thing on this is that if you've been watching the news in terms of the Supreme Court case and all that sort of stuff, and like race-based admissions and all of that, that doesn't have anything to do with us. That has to do with the US market, right? So in the US market, they're not allowed to consider race as part of the admissions process. And even before that, long before that decision, they already said you cannot have a quota, right? Like the idea is you could look at race and you could say, well, that person will have a different perspective or a different worldview, and we want that, but they would still need to meet your admissions requirement. You can't say, oh, we're going to reserve 7 slots in our medical school program for people from this background. So that's been illegal for a long, long time. That's not something that is new at all. In terms of our international populations, I don't think it's true that there are quotas. I don't think it's true that there are quotas. That being said, I think that they do look at balance, right? So I don't think that they would say, we don't want to have our, we don't want to have any more than 12 kids from this country or this city. It's not going to be that specific, but like, at the same time, you would sort of see that they want to have a variety, right? So you are, to a certain extent, competing in your own marketplace. Yeah, to a certain extent, you are competing against other people from Hong Kong for seats, but I wouldn't say it's as specific as a quota. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Why don't we go here and then we'll go there? The question was, is West Island a target school for any U.S. university? And the answer is yes. I mean, we've had some schools literally say, West Island School is a target school for us. But beyond that, our average IB scores, and I know it's weird because this is Hong Kong and most of the schools or many of the schools have sky-high IB scores, but the fact that there are several IB schools that are having an average score of 35 or 36 plus for the graduating class, that is not normal. So we're very desirable as a region, and you will see Ivy League schools and other schools like that will come. We went to an event earlier this year where UPenn was there and Brown was there, and I forget the other one that was there. But certainly Hong Kong is being targeted by those schools. Same thing in terms of like Oxbridge, like they're coming. They don't have time to visit everywhere, but like these schools, they know that we exist, and they know that our school has a great reputation, and that ESF has a great reputation. Yeah, for sure. If I'm at a university event and I say, have you heard of West Island, or have you heard of ESF? 90% of the time they'll say yes, maybe more. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I guess my question is a little bit sensitive in the sense that many of our kids may be born in Hong Kong, but may also have citizenship elsewhere. Is there any benefit to applying as a Hong Kong person versus, citizen of another place? Is there any benefit or disadvantage?
So meaning like hypothetically a student had an Australian passport and a US passport, and they're at West Island School, and they're applying either as an Australian or as a Hong Kong person, and having that have an impact on their admissions.
Right.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I guess to be more precise, would Hong Kong be classified as being kind of part of China, frankly? And then, you fall into the same quota system as, we only want to have so many people from China, hypothetically, as opposed to so many people from Australia or Canada or Austria. Let's see.
Just out of curiosity, what universities are you talking about?
Sorry, that's what I said. I can't remember the top of my head, but it would be UK universities and probably Canadian universities, because we had a lot of universities last year.
So the question was, would we be disadvantaged for having a Hong Kong passport? Would we be considered as being part of a larger Chinese population? Would we maybe not be accepted because there was so much competition because there's, a billion people applying or whatever? And sort of the response was that it probably depends a little bit on the school. We've talked to several schools that say, no, it sort of doesn't work that way. I think bigger than that, there's a term that's called institutional priorities. And so institutional priorities would be sort of these little tiebreakers. I definitely think it would be more in that little tiebreaker sort of category. Like if you applied with an Australian passport or if you applied with a Hong Kong passport, it's not like Australians are getting accepted with like 32 points and Hong Kong students are getting accepted with 36. It wouldn't be anything at all, like that sort of specific kind of like having different standards for different people or anything like that.
Just a follow-on question to that is, I've been hearing that sometimes there's visa restrictions against specific countries or students from specific countries entering whether Canada or the US. Have you heard anything like that affecting West Island students?
I've never heard about that for West Island students. There is some work that's being done on the visa system, particularly in Canada right now. And what that has been about is the idea that some people are going to for-profit institutions that are not really very educational in orientation, and they're using that as a vehicle to enter into the labor market in places like Canada. And so Canada basically wants to sort of push back on that. Generally speaking, the visa granting process is, do you appear to have the financial assets that mean that you will be able to complete the degree? And do you have strong ties to your home country so that we're not afraid that you're going to try to illegally immigrate into the country? So I hear random things in groups about occasionally kids not getting visas to place. I have been involved in international education since 2001, and I've never had a student of mine not get a visa. I know that it does happen, but it's not something like 10% of our students couldn't go to Canada this year because they didn't get their visa or something like that. Yeah. Do we need to, I think we need to maybe shut it down. I know that people have other things that we need to do, and if we have some appointments coming up ourselves. I'm really grateful that people made time in their busy schedule to come and see us today. Hopefully this session was useful to you. Hopefully people have given us some ideas about what would be most useful for future sessions, so we'll take a look at that. We're going to try to publish the next events so that people can plan a little bit better ahead. So we'll probably run an April event, a May event, and a June event, and we'll give you those dates in the next couple of weeks so that you can plan accordingly if you want to come. Okay? Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.